Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to the highlight of our annual Peace Festival, which is of course the Lord Mayor's Peace Lecture. Now the lecture is always a thought-provoking and inspiring event, and this year will be no exception. And can I thank you, Yasmin and Alibhai-Brown, so much for kindly agreeing to lead the event with a talk on keeping faith in just values in an age of populism. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what Yasmin has to say. Yasmin is an internationally celebrated author, broadcaster and journalist, an award-winning Broad Street columnist whose words have graced so many well-known newspapers. She has used her skills to challenge people's perceptions in areas such as immigration and diversity, issues so important to the beliefs of our city. Coventry is known as a multicultural city. It's a multicultural role model for others, and we're very proud of the strong communities we've built. We work around the world to spread the message of peace and reconciliation and bring people together in peace and reconciliation. And of course, I'm greatly looking forward to what Yasmin has to say. And what an inspiring venue to listen to a message of togetherness and friendship. This beautiful Guildhall of St Mary's has graced our city for centuries, and it lies in the shadow of our wonderful cathedral, known around the world as a symbol of peace. This is the 34th year of the Lord Mayor's Peace Lecture, which has seen our city welcome leading figures to challenge the way we think and shine a light on issues that need to be discussed. We've heard the thoughts of guest speakers such as Michael Morpogo, Jonathan Porritt and Paul Eicherstrom, and I'm delighted that Yasmin has agreed to join that distinguished list. So thank you all for your support for tonight's event and also for your support of the Peace Festival. Our city has once again hosted a wide variety of events that help to spread and send the message of peace around the world, from poetry, art, drama, to music, guided walks, and of course services. But this festival is just part of the work our city leads throughout the year. And as Lord Mayor, I have the privilege of seeing that work close up. I've seen how highly it is valued by our twin cities. And here can I make a special welcome to our visitors from Dresden, one of Coventry's twin cities, and others, of course, around the world. And I've had the honour of meeting some of those, many people, who work so hard for peace. Makes me very proud of our city and its people, and I look forward to more and more hearing our voice as we continue to build towards our year as the UK City of Culture 2021. So thank you again to Yasmin and everybody involved in organising tonight's event. I know how much organisation goes into organising events such as this, and of course our Peace Festival. And by sharing our thoughts and questioning what is wrong, we encourage and empower others to have confidence to challenge where it is necessary. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Philip Brown, Chair of the Lord Mayor's Peace Committee, to tell us more about what's to come tonight. So enjoy the evening and my very best wishes for the future. Thank you so much.
So I haven't got much to say. Yasmin is going to talk to you, and the subject of her talk is keeping faith in just values in an age of populism. That's the word, sorry.
I was going to stand at the lectern, but when you're short, you look very silly behind a lectern, so I hope this is all right. Thank you very much indeed, City of Coventry, distinguished guests, the Mayor and all of you for asking me to deliver this talk. It's a bit daunting. You know, if you're a flighty journalist, these things are both important but very a different responsibility. Over the years, I've addressed various audiences on equality, diversity, human rights, inclusion across the UK, the EU, North America, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa, Singapore, Malaysia, Middle East, and so on. But here's the thing. Much of what I said over the years, the analysis, the facts, the arguments, the hopes, have had to be reconsidered. So much has changed around the world. Reality itself seems very shaky at the moment and unstable. I sometimes feel I hardly know the world we're suddenly living in. And the past is another country. The present, though, feels like an unknown land. So I'm going to start with a brief history of equality, diversity and inclusion. All the milestones, the campaigns and changes that incrementally edged in progressive social and political policies, shifts in understanding and behaviour, and we've just seen a wonderful example. A group of fabulous singers, it didn't matter who they were or where they were from, they sang with a single voice. That came after struggles. I'd then like to share with you what I think is happening in our extraordinary times, as much as I can, because it is unpredictable and confusing. And then I'll go into some of the ways we've done things in the past, the definitions, the private and public initiatives and policies, the narratives, and examine what they meant and how they're playing in these times, and whether now what we thought was understood by most people, not all, but most people, is now questioned, opposed. There are animosities and resistances to concepts like equality and justice, and emerging demands from various groups. I have lived such a very long time. Such a very long time. That's both a blessing, but also at times startling, because when I tell my children and grandchildren that I lived in a British colony, they think the colonial period was, 1,000 years ago. But I did. I've lived through the days of colonization, through independence in Uganda, my home country, post-colonial struggles, forced migration, activism here, and so on and so on. And I've learned one thing, that history is non-linear. You don't go from darkness to light. That is the way I used to think when I was younger. History is cyclical. There are times when you go into a more hopeful era, and then it crashes, and you have to start all over again. And sometimes that feels like a huge challenge, a moment of disillusionment. And I think we're there now, actually. We have hit a new low point. In some ways, not in others. But I am incredibly worried. I'm incredibly worried about the whole world, not just our country. And finally, I want to sort of explore whether there are new, smarter, better ways of getting society back on course with the progressive agenda, if you like. For the many who still have to fight for their rights and dignity, for the others who are dispossessed and frustrated. How do we keep faith in just values, in openness, in a civil society, in this age of chaos and populism? And remember one thing, and I'm very pleased that the people of Dresden are here. Populism in modern history has always preceded periods of total political and physical brutality. it always starts with populism. It started with populism, as we know, in Germany, but it started with populism too in Bosnia, and it started with populism in Rwanda. And we have to be very careful that we don't kind of understand the dangers of some of the things that we're witnessing. What we need to bring out in all of us, just when we might be losing that optimism, which I am, we have to find courage, conviction, consistency, and compromise. And I'll come to those towards the end of my talk. So first, a very brief history. Britain is a mongrel nation. It's not me saying it, but Daniel Defoe, the 17th century great writer who wrote Robinson Crusoe, wrote a poem in 1701 on The True Englishman, it was called. And it said, from a mixture of all kinds began that heterogeneous thing, an Englishman. Now, of course, when he was writing, an Englishman more or less covered everybody. Some of you might have seen a book called Staying Power, one of the greatest books ever written, history books ever written, by a white Marxist historian, Peter Fryer. And it is the first ever history of black people in this country. And it's the most astonishing book. It's just been reprinted. And the very first sentence in this book is this: there were Africans in Britain before the English came here. Now, whenever I quote this in some audiences, there is a little ripple, sometimes a cross little ripple. But he's right. Because before Englandness had formed, there were Africans in the Roman battalions centuries before that. Because Englishness came into being really in the 1500s, the consciousness and the actuality. And so they were in the Roman army. There's been bodies found of Africans in York, in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they were at Hadrian's Wall. It was mainly an African battalion. This is a land, this is a nation made by invaders, occupiers, and migrants, right from the time the boats went forth and the Vikings and whoever it was took off in their boats. From the age of exploration particularly. And every new group that came into this country was resented, then absorbed, and then it was the turn of the next group. And one of the most depressing things to me is how quickly those groups that were accepted become as kind of negative towards the next group. I think that's probably human nature. Queen Elizabeth I, for example, and I've written this in my book called Exotic England, was a very complicated woman. She issued the first anti-black immigration order in this country in her time, because there were lots of ex-slaves, slaves, and servants, black people here. So she said that she wanted these blackamoors removed forthwith from her island. They ignored her, nobody left, they stayed. But the same queen was enraptured with Ottoman oligarchs. She absolutely worshipped the court of the Ottoman Sultan. She sent him fabulous gifts. She sent her tailor on secret missions to copy the fashions of Istanbul. So here you have the complex response to the other. It's never been, and all of that is in this book. I've described her. She was so close to them that the Pope denounced her. The Pope said she's too close to the infidels, this Queen of England. So we have both sides coming out in Queen Elizabeth. When Protestant Huguenots fled to England from France in the 17th century, because there were Protestants and France had decided to become fanatically Catholic, they came here. They were very talented people, some were quite rich, but almost immediately there was a reaction. And the sentiments were expressed in pamphlets, in plays. So here is one line from a poem. The nation, it is almost quite undone by Frenchmen that do it daily outrun. You thought Brexit was the problem? Hey guys, 17th century, nothing's new, everything comes back in a cycle. Before that, of course, Jews were persecuted, banished, then invited back, beaten up, killed. Continental workers who came over and actually started the first breweries in Britain, found their houses were burned down, and so on and so on. Those who went abroad came back with new foods, new fads, designs. Christopher Wren, who designed St. Paul's Cathedral, described his style, the style of the cathedral, as Indo-Saracenic, which is the Mughal style. So I used to take my mum for drives around London, and she would look at St. Paul's and say, "Oh, just like a mosque, no?" And I'd say, "No, don't be silly, Jenna, it's a church." After she dies, I find out she was actually quite right. It was the Indo-Saracenic style. The first, and this is fascinating, like I said, it's all in something I discovered when I was writing the book. The first Indian takeaway in this country, was set up by an English woman. An English woman started the first Indian takeaway. Her name was Sarah Shade, and she was an adventurous. She went to India in the mid-1700s on a boat, fell in love with a soldier, got to India, fought a tiger, there were marks on her body, eventually got caught up in the war in Mysore when the East India Company was fighting to grab the land. And while she was in prison, she did two things, unusual things. She learned the local language and she learned the local food. But when she came back, she had a pad in Marylebone in London, and the East India Company families were coming back, and their tongues had been spiced up. They wanted spicy food. So she would cook 3 dishes in her little place in Marylebone, and carriages would come and pick up the food. So here is the story of this nation. It is more mixed than almost any other Western nation that we know of. White British women embraced the incomer throughout history, the unknowable stranger, the handsome dark man. And in fact, in 1578, a chap called George Best, a very pompous Englishman, wrote a pamphlet about how many of these English women were taking up with black men and producing coffee-coloured children. This didn't happen anywhere else. It didn't happen in Europe. It didn't happen in America. It couldn't happen in America because it was all so divided. Then we had the Windrush story, which we all know about. But before that, every single race riot in this country, going back to, I think the first one was 1911, in many dock areas, were all provoked by the sight of a white woman with a black man. So when Shakespeare was writing Othello, he had seen this. It wasn't his imagination at all. England was already changing. So Meghan Markle is not the first at all to kind of change the story of this country. But there were always, throughout this history, too many migrants. And there's a wonderful speech in an unfinished Shakespeare play about Thomas More, where there is this speech, and I hope I remember it, because there was such violence against new incomers. So Shakespeare put this speech in this unfinished play. Grant them removed. Imagine you see the wretched stranger with the babies at the back and their poor luggage plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation. What had that got you? I'll tell you. You had taught that strong hand should prevail, and by this pattern not one of you should live an aged man, for other ruffians, as their fancies wrought, with self-same hand, self-reason, and self-right, will shark upon you. This was William Shakespeare. So all the anti-immigration stuff we're getting now is not new. It's part of our story. The 1905 Aliens Act started the perfidious response to migration, and it's been like that ever since, to this day. We need them, but we don't want them. And somehow we have to always make them feel, you will never belong. Okay? So I sometimes feel we need to know our history, at least to learn that in spite of all this, people did belong, people did settle. There were other people who embraced them, who understood them, and who made it okay. Politicians of all parties have been totally unscrupulous in this. But there have been some interesting good people too. There was a wonderful Labour MP called Fenner Brockway when the Windrush generation arrived. When we came, Uganda nations, Enoch Pearl was very popular, and it was actually Ted Heath who stood up for the Ugandan nations, and at a time when he was deeply unpopular, and his career ended because of that. But he did the right thing, and I'm not a Tory, not a natural Tory, but I've always said that, there were some decent politicians, but very few who stood up for immigrants. Actually, even Boris did once upon a time, believe it or not, but then Boris, yes, Boris. We had some very progressive legislation in the 70s. We got policies passed, we got equal opportunities, and we thought we were on a road. We thought we were on a road to create a more equal society. But then, the clampdowns came after the Conservative Mrs. Thatcher didn't like that legislation. But in spite of that, I think at local authority level, equality was pursued quite passionately and quite well. But then, I think, and Blair was very good on some of this, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, all of that. And then came the new century. And the new century blasted away a lot of things we thought we had kind of embedded. We got identity politics, fragmentation, religious fanaticisms across the world, differences emphasized more than commonalities. When in my heyday, I was an anti-racist. I used to come to Coventry all the time. Before I became a journalist, I used to teach for this fantastic thing called Industrial Language Training Program. And there were lots of people here in Coventry, Walsall and so on. And we did so much work and thought we were really changing the world. But we were all together. White, black, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh. We never thought about our differences. We had a cause. One of the most depressing things for me now is how fragmented we are. And we, of course, fragmentation means we are much less effective. We are each fighting our own corners. We have no collective strength. And of course, we are also living in times where the fragmentation is applying to the working classes. So suddenly we are now having to talk about white working classes. Actually, the working classes were always multiracial. They were more multiracial than the middle classes ever were, because they worked in factories, buses, National Health Service together. Suddenly, they've been racialized by politicians, by intellectuals, some of whom I personally find loathsome, but there we are, who talk about, people. I don't know if any of you remember this, but I will never forget it. When Mrs. May last year at the conference speech said, and she was quoting David Goodhart, an intellectual who has intellectualized this fragmentation and kind of white resentment theory. And he said, people of everywhere, that's half the people in this room, are people of nowhere. It's only the people of somewhere who matter. Mrs. May repeated that. How do you think migrants and settlers generations on felt when their Prime Minister got up and described them as people of nowhere? If any of you Black or Asian people or Jewish people are Tory voters, don't vote for the woman who said that. Really don't. Okay? And then of course we had other problems. You got Islamicism, you got 9/11, you got 7/7, globalization, the terrible desertification, if you like, of the north of Britain, the divide between north and south, London and the rest, migrants and the rest, Muslim Sikhs and so on. And I just want to hold on to the 2 or 3 things that will take us out of this period of fragmentation. One, that we have more in common than we have things that divide us. That when we turn on each other, I mean, the depressing thing, to see those who passed the austerity policies and created poverty and pain, deliberately planned poverty and pain, encourage those people who suffered to hate their neighbours, to hate the asylum seeker, instead of what they should have done was hate George Osborne and Ian Duncan Smith, frankly, who created the austerity sort of policy stream, which they still hold on to. I wish we could think more in commonalities and what we owe each other. That's what I meant by compromise. I'm often saying to my fellow Muslims, you can't keep demanding more and more of this society, right? You have a social contract. You live in a democracy. Not one Muslim country in the world, and I wrote that in my column today. I've defended, in my column today, I've said Asya Bibi, this poor Pakistani Christian woman, should be absolutely given asylum. Not one Muslim country in the world today gives us the rights and freedoms we have here. It's a matter of great shame to me. Okay, but a democracy of such complexity and multiplicity cannot survive unless there is give and take. And sometimes I feel my people, and they're not necessarily all my people, we aren't thinking about how much we need to give and take and compromise. Also, we don't understand some of the histories of Europe, of this country, and we need to educate ourselves. We need to know why Europe rejected the power of religious authoritarianism over the centuries. What was happening in those centuries when Catholicism and Protestantism oppressed its people. If we don't know that, we cannot understand why some of the people feel so anxious about religious, if you like, excessive religious sloganizing and acting up. To me, religion is something in my heart and in my home, and I don't want it to be part of politics. And unfortunately, we've reached a point where, whether it's the fanatics in America, the Christian fanatics in America, or some of the fanaticisms here, it's taking over our democracies. So the situation then, and the whole UKIP business, one of the saddest things was how many minorities were seduced by some of the talk of UKIP, even if they didn't vote for them. The whole populist thing, Trump, Farage, Banks, Bannon, feted by our media, including the BBC, experts no longer respected. Ours is an age of rage, but more importantly, we have entered. This is what pre-fascism looks like. Fintan O'Toole is a wonderful writer in the Irish Times, and you can look up a column he did about 6 weeks ago, saying we are in pre-fascist times, and I'll quote one line from there. Like hounds, people have to be blooded. They have to be given the taste for savagery. Fascism does this by building up the sense of threat from a despised outgroup. This allows members of that group to be dehumanized. Once that's been achieved, the members of that group, you can gradually up the ante, working through the stages from breaking windows to extermination. And then he talks about how Europe has been responding to the boat people, or some of the unaccompanied children refugees. It's an extraordinary piece. It really scared me. He said, this is how it works. This is then how the media behaves. This is how the people behave. And we enter the age of pre-fascism and then tip over. So it's really serious, folks. We're in a really serious place here. And it's up to us, all of us, who believe that we have to keep alive just values, open values, to do whatever we can to fight against this. I've written a new book, which I'm going to talk about on Start the Week next week, and it's called In Defense of Political Correctness, where I've said that it's when we got rid of, and on the cover are the anti-heroes, Trump, Farage, Katie Hopkins, and this horrible man called Milo, somebody or the other, who are these pre-fascist leaders, if you like, populist leaders. So, what do we do? What shall we do? What can we do? We have to believe that there are enough human beings who are good, who have not abandoned justice, equality, dignity for all, who have moral integrity. The problem is that the project, those who have pushed this project are ruthless, are loud, are unafraid of the impact that they're making, and they've terrified all of us. I mean, even I sometimes get scared, because they follow you, they troll you, you are not, it's what one writer has called populist correctness. So you can't say any number of things without having to pay a price. But that's when I think people should become stronger, not weaker, including myself. I think we who believe in these values sometimes have been weak, sometimes gutless, or too damn nice as liberal progressives. We were knocked back by aggressive traditionalists or aggressive hard, right people. You saw today we've had the convictions for Britain First. The kind of people who are now in our midst, we should be very worried about it. Too much territory has been taken by the reactionaries. it is important to keep reminding our citizens that equality brought the changes and really made life better for everybody here. My mother-in-law was very English, lived in one small part of Sussex till she died this year, Vera. She always used to say to me, God, you women are so lucky to live in these times. What was my life? You know, Doug was her husband, was not a bad man, but I had no life. You know, I cooked, I waited for him to come from the pub, I went to bed, I had children. I could have done so much with my life. It was really sad to hear somebody who grew, you know, who knew life in the 50s. And so all this nonsense about we want to go back to the life in the 50s, ask the women what it was like. It was no fun. Ask black people, ask Irish people what it was like back then. So we changed society for the better. What the good news is, and I'll give you some good news, business and institutions do maintain their nerve in all of this, even though they're often attacked in the press, you know, oh, BC gone mad, BC gone mad, equality policies, the Me Too movement, you know, really shaking up some of the old ways is happening. I think back to attitudes towards gay people. Only 20 years ago, 15 years ago, Blair came and changed the law. And it was the change in the law that changed the attitudes of people. He completely destroyed his legacy with Iraq, but when one looks at what he did in many other areas, those were the good times. So what can we do? I think we have to absolutely be clear that these are permanent and good values. They're ethical values. You don't roll over. You don't roll over. You know, you maintain. Of course, you can't be stubborn. I think we people, egalitarians, made a lot of mistakes. I get very upset that, for example, Muslim activists hardly ever talk about all the things that we do wrong. We have to be very honest. We're all guilty of different kinds of crimes and misdemeanors. Okay, being black doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. Together, we have to create a more ethical society. The good news is this: young people. Our young people are amazing, most of them. They are ethical, they are brave, they want a better world. And I feel that we older people can today learn from them, actually. You know, I was kind of iffy. We all have our prejudices. So I was saying to my daughter, oh, I don't understand this trans business at all. Why is all this fuss going on about this trans business? We all have these spots, you know, none of us is perfect. And she sat down and for an hour lectured me on how could I be like this? How can I not understand what they've gone through or what they're going through? And I learned from her. I learned from her that I do have these pockets of ignorance and prejudice. So I think it's not over till it's over. We have a big fight ahead of us. The world is going to get much worse before it gets better. But we can only, I think the way to do it is a human rights and equality template which you apply to everyone, yourself included. I'm not loyal to anyone. I'm not loyal to my family, I'm not loyal to myself, I'm not loyal to my community, I'm not loyal to my nation. I feel it's important constantly to see where things are going wrong in myself as much as anybody else. That helps to have a moral compass. And I want to end with a section in my book so that, how much time do I have? Okay, can I carry on for a minute then? Okay. So, learn from past mistakes. We anti-racists should never have split off from each other. We should never have even, I never use the word Islamophobia. I use the word racism. Because once you use a different word, you have already become part of a fragmented group, and that weakens you. I think we need white people to be with us on this fight for equality, and we need to consider, their pain too. I mean, I'll give you an example. My husband, who's English, very nice man, really very nice man, proper anti-racist, wrote a book about it, and proper feminist. So, 2 years ago, he went for a job, and he did a very good interview, and he was told, yeah, you did really well, you were the best candidate, but we've decided that because we're male-heavy, we're going to give the job to an in-house woman and train her up. So he came home, Mr. Brown, who all these years, has fought with me for all of this, and he was spitting his teeth out. How could they do this to me? I was the best person for the job. 2 days of stamping his feet. And I said, well, sorry, guy, this is what it's about. Change cannot happen unless these very difficult decisions are made. I understand your pain. I completely understand your pain. And it's unfair. But, change has to happen. But it was really interesting to me. So, of course, it's not easy. And it's also very complicated. So I met a guy, a doctor, a young black doctor called Samuel, a month or so ago. And he was talking to me about how he'd been discriminated against in the National Health Service. He's very bright, where he wants to be and how difficult it is. And could I give him some tips? And I said, the difficulties I've had and how I've dealt with it, and how, although your heart gets broken over and over again, you don't give up. And at the end of the conversation, Samuel says to me, but now, I don't like those gay people, I don't like this gay business. Why are we giving gay people or homosexuals so many rights? Same man, same conversation, okay? So I said, have you heard yourselves talking? You've just told me how you feel as a black man. And now you're telling me that you don't want gay people to have the same rights as you. So, do you see what I mean? The same person can have both. Of course, we're humans. We want more equality for ourselves, but we don't necessarily want to give equality to others. We don't seem to transfer the lessons. So there's a lot of complication here that we need to be thinking about. Multiculturalism, I think, had a time and a place. We have moved to a different place now. I prefer now to think in terms of dynamic interculturalism, because we are all intercultural. I can ask every single one of you in this room just a simple question about what did you eat this week? And you will all have been eating various foods which are culturally different from what probably your grandfather used to eat. I can ask you how many people you work with, your friends. We are all intercultural. And that interculturality is dynamic, but it is also difficult because it calls for two things. Yes, we respect difference, but we must also disrespect difference. What do I mean by that? You can't respect all things that different people do as culturally. I cannot respect the drink culture of Great Britain. I'm sorry. I find it embarrassing. It makes me feel worried for the population that drink and over-drinking is such a part of this culture. So don't ask me to respect it because I won't. But I respect deeply the liberal heart of this society. I will never expect anyone to respect the way in so many Asian families females are treated. And I don't just mean, forced marriage and so on. In my own family, we finish eating, the auntie or the grandmother will say to the girls, okay, clear up, but not to the boys. Okay? Boys don't know what a dishwasher looks like. Boys have never done any washing up. That is not something you should respect. So when you have dynamic interculturalism, we can say to each other, I don't respect these things that go on in your culture. And it's said with good faith. It's not said with hatred. And I think it's only then that you can have genuine bonding. It is like being in a family, like, after all. You know, we don't hide what we think about each other in our families. You don't fall over yourself to say you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful all the time. We have to be more honest and we have to be more just. And I think that is the next phase if we're going to beat the forces of reactionaries and, the UKIP and all that. We have the same needs, drives, desires. We should not assume that, there are these kind of such differences between us that the best thing is to leave people alone. That's what happened with the grooming gangs. The grooming gangs should have been investigated. They weren't investigated because too many people thought, this is their culture. It's not our culture. It shouldn't be our culture to go around doing what they did. But there was this, these are no-go areas. There should be no no-go areas, and it works both ways. I am often critical of some white men, for which I'm trolled incessantly. Everywhere I go, they say, I hate white men, I want them extinct. Let me tell all the white men in this room, I love you, I married one of you, you're the really lovely people, but that doesn't mean I cannot criticize the power that is held, the way, power is still clung to, and so on. And inclusion, everybody should feel part of this thing. And it was lovely to watch the choir singing, because in a way that exemplified what I am saying. That, it's a very big and difficult challenge. I'm just going to read one page from one of my books, and then we can have questions. So when I wrote this book, I was very aware that England, and it's written for England, not for Britain, was becoming restive. And this is long before UKIP. England is where I live, work, play, cry, laugh, suffer, and flourish. Fate brought me to these shores, and now I could not live anywhere else. Almost gone are those deep yearnings for Uganda, my birthplace, from whence I was exiled in 1972. This England, merry, stormy, warm, cold, unchanging, always changing, is my homeland. I speak to it, and sometimes for it. Not out of audacity, but affection, grown over many decades. It's been tough at times. Hostility to migrant settlers and minorities pollutes the atmosphere, saps hope. But the nation's open spirit, its liberalism, and cultural liveliness offsets the negative ions. Most migrants to Britain can't disentangle their convoluted emotions about a land that is duplicitous and yet remarkable, truly great. Many who want to belong cannot do so, because their overtures are regarded with suspicion or rejected, or because it feels like a betrayal of their previous countries. Or is it fear that such attachments and affirmations could be unseemly? Yet every day, Englanders and outsiders reach out to each other, touch, trust, share, transfer ideas and knowledge, build resilient relationships, form ties that bind. This is their story, and ours too. Thank you.
So, the book is Exotic England. We've got time for a couple of questions. If anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment or give some feedback. So we've got 3 over on this side. Is there any on that side? 1 on that side. Well, let's start off with somebody on this side. So round. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah,
so we've got a
just to break the ice, that's it. That everybody else can ask. Do
you want to have the mic?
I think my mouth is big enough. I think just to say, Yasmin, I know we always sometimes listen to you on debates, but this is the first time I've seen the structured debate you put on. And I could not find a single word anywhere in the sentence where I could disagree with you. I think it's brilliant.
So, there's a gentleman on that side. Put your hand up again, sir.
We want a woman next.
There's the lady who's just behind the camera.
Thank you.
They should volunteer, yes.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for that inspiring talk. I do follow you, I read your articles. I haven't read the latest book, but I promise you I will. The elephant in the room, obviously, has been Brexit. There's very little reference to it. I wonder how you think it's going to impact, regardless of the outcome, on multiculturalism or interculturalism, as you call it now. That's first. And then, just a quick one. I also admire your courage in mentioning lots of names and saying it as it is, and that's what makes reading you very interesting. I won't mention any names, but one president has just told another president that nationalism is the opposite of patriotism. What's your take on that? Thank you.
Very, very good questions. Well, I think Brexit has led to, when I talked about fragmentation, one of the biggest causes in recent years of fragmentation has been Brexit. And I know people don't like to hear this. I don't think everybody who voted to leave was a racist, but I do think every racist voted for Brexit. There's a difference, an important one. And I knew how bad things were becoming. It was in '72 when I came here, and Enoch Powell was very popular. I had a scholarship to Oxford to do my second degree, and I was sitting in a park reading Jane Austen, and a chap came up and spat at me and told me we don't want you people here. In 2016, in November, I'm sitting on the number 9 bus on High Street, Kensington, which is one of the posh areas of London, and a woman in her 50s spat at me and said, "F off, Paki, we don't want your sort here." So I know what the effect has been. So it has unleashed something which is going to, whatever happens with Brexit, I'm a very passionate Remainer. We are really in for hard times, and one of my disappointments, if you like, in life is that so many Black and Asian people voted for Brexit, thinking that turning on the Eastern Europeans as if, that would give us some special status. We are back to some of the worst days of overt racism. My daughter, who's a medical engineer, was told in a small Welsh hospital, who's half English, that Brexit means people like her will soon be gone. So I'm very worried about it. What was the second bit you said? Oh, yes, and that's the other thing. The naked nationalism the nationalism, not just of Trump, but of Farage, which is why this new book is why they're on the cover, right? They're talking about the real people of Britain, the people of somewhere, yeah? Nativism has risen again. And I fear where we're going to, but where I feel very strongly is that if good people understand what the threats are and come together and really, really stop this, then we might just come out of it. But at the moment, there's such surrender, such fear of these forces of darkness.
And there's a lady with a question.
Hello, thank you for your really insightful talk. I'm going to ask that you mentioned before about young people, and how young people at the moment are very ethical in their morals. I completely agree with you. There have been, I have met so many inspirational young people who want to take action to do something. At the moment, in this age of populism, we have people making decisions that are going to affect young people in the future, and our generation is going to be greatly affected by these decisions. So what can young people do now, especially young women, to make sure that their voices are heard? Because it's actually quite difficult, and so just a bit of advice on that. Thank you.
I just want to say, I think what happened in Iraq was absolutely unforgivable. The one thing that was very interesting is that the people of this country really objected. That's the one thing that I feel proud about, that this was something the politicians pushed, not the people of this country. And so anything we can do from there, we will do. But I think actually the young are showing the old at the moment. It was the young women who started with Me Too. And they spoke up when women weren't speaking up. Women of my generation who went through all of this never spoke up, right? So I think you should have much more pride in the fact that the young women are really speaking up and not taking nonsense. But I think the decision to leave was such a betrayal of the younger generation. But you will have the chance to reclaim your place in Europe one day, or at least become, or make that claim for internationalism. You always know when people are effective when the tabloids start attacking them. And the way they always attack the university students and young people for being this and snowflakes and so on, that shows me, and I've dealt with that in this book, that they're scared of the young. And you have real power. If we get another vote, at least in what kind of deal we are going to get, I hope the young really come out. But you know what? You have more to teach me than I have to teach you, because your generation has been totally amazing in the last 5 years. So, I wish I was young again, but really.
Okay, we have not got much time left, so I'd like to invite John to say a few words.
Thank you, Philip. Just really briefly on behalf of us all to say a massive thank you to Yasmin for exciting us. We quite often introduce events in this hall by saying that we believe that Shakespeare probably performed in here. So to have your without reading it, to perform Shakespeare on this stage was a great joy, and so congratulations for that. And, so that's the first thing I want to say. And then also in this historic building to take us on that great arc through British history and to describe us as a mongrel nation. which was again incredibly striking and really lands home exceptionally well in this very diverse city. And we make much of the fact that we believe that in years gone by, Coventry was one of the leading British cities, maybe the third or the fourth city, and to have the sense that we represent the nation in that kind of way. But then you took us on through recognising that actually, in many ways, history is cyclical, and those kind of almost terrifying observations about whether populism is puts us in a pre-fascist stage, and others of us will have heard descriptions in that kind of way, particularly of some of the more nationalist leaders in our world at the moment, and the difficulty of actually seeing proper dialogue taking place in politics, simply those who support on one side and those who oppose on the other, and no real conversation is one of the hallmarks of that populist pre-fascist stage. So then, moving on just before you finished into saying, well, what can we do about it? So you're just going to take us down into the depths, which was great. And one of the things which is hopefully some of the best things religion can do, but can't always do, does a lot of things that aren't always that helpful, but one of the things that religion can do is help us to be honest about ourselves. And I think the encouragement for us to be honest about ourselves, to recognise the moments in ourselves where actually we become as unaccepting of others as we're critical of them, in our own words. So to be honest about ourselves, I think the first thing that we have to do. But then actually, coming back, and there were a number of things that you said entertainingly, but piercingly accurately about a number of other people. Though I was relieved that you don't hate all white men. That was good to know. But actually to speak appropriately critically of others out of a real honest reflection on who we are. So I think you've taken us back into a place of hope by the end of all of that. We're very proud of being a city of peace and reconciliation. We've challenged many of us by how we exhibited our own character in the referendum vote. Of course, that's a challenge to many of us here in this room. But nonetheless, inspired by your passion, by the call to be critically and appropriately honest about ourselves, but also critically and appropriately honest about others. And I guess finally to come back to the power and the possibility of those who are young leading the way. So thank you so much for what you've given us tonight. You've inspired us, you've entertained us, and you've given us some challenges for the future. Thank you very much.
Can I just add my thanks to Yasmin? And I thought at first like you weren't going to be controversial, but sure enough you were controversial, and I'm sure you've said lots of things here that a lot of people agree with, some people would disagree with, but I think the one thing that you've given all of us is food for thought and to reflect upon exactly what we are and how we take things forward. So thank you very much indeed for that. I thoroughly enjoyed your talk, and I expect everybody else. So I think another round of applause.